say, here's a lesson you don't get. I said, I loop the loop when I get loose. I said, ignition, ignite your night out.
Hello and welcome back to the Not Fade Away podcast. This is your host, Margot D. It's been a few months. I've missed you guys. Today I'm speaking with author Chris Balz. He has written a book called Burning the May Tree, The Sacrifice of Jim Morrison. And today we're going to be talking about specifically the poetry and writings of Jim Morrison. So not so much the song lyrics or his stardom so much as his interior life, his internal thoughts. I really enjoyed speaking with Chris about this, and the way we were introduced is that his editor was an extra in the Doors movie, and so was I, and we were there at the same time, but obviously we didn't know each other because there's thousands of people in the crowd. But I was an extra in a scene where they do an outdoor concert scene, and it was super fun. It was totally amazing. Val Kilmer did a great job. And one of these days, I'll go into more about what it was like to film that. But today, let's talk about Jim and his poetry. I think you're going to really enjoy this. Be sure to subscribe, that way you'll never miss an episode. And here we go with my interview with Chris Balz. So I'm speaking to the author of Burning the May Tree, The Sacrifice of Jim Morrison. Here's Chris Balz. Hello, Chris.
Hi, it's my great pleasure to be here. Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. So my very first episode was about Jim Morrison, and people loved that episode. And can you talk a little bit about your background of the Doors? How'd you get into their music, and how did this become kind of an obsession for you? Excuse me.
Well, as growing up, I was always curious about rock and roll, and just sort of looking around me. I'm from Southern Michigan, and I noticed. Well, I was from the suburbs, but I noticed we had the history in Detroit of the Detroit riots, and I was just always curious. What's going on out there? And the Doors seemed to offer a window into that was very interesting to me. The lyrics intrigued me, and then I learned that my track coach in high school, who was like a world-class distance runner, he had actually written a paper in college for his graduate degree on Jim Morrison's poetry, or Jim Morrison and the Doors. I read that, and it just sort of sowed in the seed in me to investigate further. And then I kind of forgot about it for a few years, and I was studying a lot of history in college, and I was curious about the dynamics of social change. Instead of Western civilization, I got to take conflict and change, which is pretty cool. Of course, that was a lot of Western civilization. It was just like a kind of a more accurate, I feel, look at Western culture. And so I was always thinking, how does society change? What did that me to really and ultimately to write this book. Frank Lisiandro had come out as the editor of Jim's posthumously published works of poetry right when undergraduate honors thesis was set to start. So that it looked like to me, well, a lot of my academic training is to look at artifacts of literature and art as really your best signposts to history.
We were talking about conflict. I mean, what's going on in the world right now? Like, what would you think Jim Morrison would think of what's happening in 2020 if he were alive? I mean,
yeah, that one is. I've been thinking about that. I thought you might ask me that. That's a great question, actually. I think he would just sort of see it as inevitable. And a lot of his best work, in my opinion, really goes into some of the insanity that has been baked into the cake of American life really since really the 50s or maybe the turn of the century. And I think Jim would just sort of see it as inevitable. Lines like the deadening of individuality and freedom of expression, buckled in our seats waiting to take off is like one of the lines from Jim's poetry, where you're in a jetliner. It's like you're going to fly, but you're buckled in. You're a cow in a cattle herd. his poetry is filled with those kinds of references. And it's one of the things that really fascinates me about it. This whole idea of like war is dangerous football. There's a wonderful. I don't know if it's on Strange Days or not. Maybe it's in the American Night, the album, not the book, or maybe it's in both. But there's imagery of carnival, and then war comes in and mixes in to that. None of this was really part of the founding of this country. These are things that have crept in, maybe with the wholesale importation of Nazis into the CIA after World War II. There's a lot of different avenues you can go down if you're into that. But Jim really focused on looking at the reality of what we have now. And, also, he does harken back a lot to core positive themes in American life, such as line one was called freedom, the other one was called enterprise, right? Mm-hmm. We walked out, we met two girls, one was named freedom, the other enterprise. Okay, so there's this abiding theme of hope, but then layered on it are activities such as his father participated in, like the Gulf of Tonkin, right, which was a scam, right, to like ramp up the Vietnam War. I've heard such amazing, horrible stories about what war was perverted into in Vietnam, this police action where the military is used. I think he would look at it and say, wow, we have the militarization of the police and the policification of the military. This is great in a sardonic way.
He predicted it.
Probably, yeah. And to me, there's also you can find on YouTube some great clips of him. I haven't found it in the writing, at least not yet, where Jim is carrying on a conversation with an imaginary other person. And that other person is like a boss, on like a work crew or in some sort of dangerous situation, maybe a facility that is going to blow up or something. And Jim says, there's not much time there, is there, boss? And then Jim shifts to the personality of the boss, and the boss says, no. and so I think a lot also, looking well, when I was growing up, it seemed inevitable that it seemed risky with all these nukes. It seemed like there could be an accidental nuclear war. Maybe we just had an accidental virus outbreak. There are all these themes of doom, I think, that you get when you have these really massive centralized societies like in Nazi Germany, or I think now today in the U.S. Mm-hmm. Although thankfully we have a lot to grab onto to avoid, I think the worst of it. And so I think Jim just really had a sense of the vastness of the U.S. and its reach, or the reach of the dollar. The dollar as reserve world currency, funding. What green? There's like a line of Jim's poem, what the color green? And then he goes into an image of billowing tall grass, maybe rice paddy grass, that under the helicopter's blades, and what does it mean? It's like what the deuce, or it means like he's substituting he's substituting the color green, the military color for, in this scenario, although, Jim wasn't speaking about anyone individually, he's just noting how this color of green is in a sense, it's everywhere. Okay, it's all over the world, but it's also like the U.S. Army is almost all over the world. And thankfully, there have been some moves to retrench from the so-called empire. But Jim had a sense of the destructive capacity. Just for one example, I have a friend who has refugees from Libya in his daughter's class in Switzerland. This is because the U.S., in cahoots with Western Europe, decapitated the leadership of Libya and left no alternative there in its place. And so now it's a gigantic, that whole area that was a beautiful, if very imperfect country, is now just this wasteland of fractured civil war, fractured into many pieces, not just two sides.
This is really interesting. I mean, in my episode, I talked about his relationship with his father, which was very fraught. And his father had an exceptional career in the Navy. He went very high up in the military. Yeah. And Jim, I mean, could match him with intelligence. Jim was a very intelligent person. I think not enough people give him credit for that. I think I want to go into, like, why do you think, and when I talk about the Doors, sometimes Doors get a lot of Doors hate. There's people who just, like, cannot take the Doors. What do you think that is? Like, what do you think it is that kind of rubs people the wrong way?
Right. I think it's just the preposterousness of their thesis, mm-hmm. That they're going to be the doors of perception for you, and when it's ironic because, Iggy Pop and a lot of the punk rockers and even the hardcore punk that came later, they took their cue. Jim pioneered this whole idea of challenging the audience to grow and to be strong. So yeah, when it first came out, it was over the top.
Right.
But also you got to consider, like at that time, there was really a massive bloodletting going on in Southeast Asia, mm-hmm. on all sides, way, way bigger than we've had ever since. And that was a lot on, I'm sure. I mean, Jim has this line, to go and kill somebody because you disagree with their politics is barbaric. And so I know that was a lot on his mind. And because, if you talk about politics, it can really kill your art, because it limits it too much. Mm-hmm. Jim avoided that. But yeah, I think it's just the cynicism of what happened. The punks saw the, society turned inward and became very navel gazing, not to put that down, but all these big dreams, waiting for the sun, Jim outlines, a progression, mm-hmm. of social change in waiting for the sun. And, look what happened, right?
Right.
Everything got completely foobarred. So I think that's really a lot, to answer your question directly, that's really a lot of where that came from, is just the punks sort of laughing at Jim. And that reminds me to, metal. How does metal relate to the Doors? So I was actually looking that up, and I don't really have any good answers for you on that, but something I'm considering.
So Jim leaves and goes to Paris. Do you think he meant to go forever? Like he was now going to transition into being a writer, that he was going to leave music forever?
It's hard to say exactly what's going on. Arthur Rimbaud, who was one of his main inspirations in poetry, mm-hmm. and Arthur Rimbaud split for Africa and became an arms dealer. He wrote some of the best poetry in the Western world, by the time he was 21 or so, maybe even 19. I'm not exactly sure on that, but it's very young. Mm-hmm. And he was a big, famous person in Paris and parts of Germany, was just quite a huge literary figure, really young. And then he just got sick of it and went to Africa. And, Jim does sing those words in one of the songs, "I'm going to go to Africa," something like that. And being an arms dealer in Africa, he was just really unknown. Eventually, Rimbaud got sick and died. But the idea is this really mercenary approach where, Jim was under indictment in the U.S., mm-hmm. or warrant in Dade County, and it wasn't looking too good for him in terms of the law. So because of the Miami incident, I think in a sense, that was probably an easy decision to make. Jim did a lot of tricky things, and he was a hardcore trickster. Mm-hmm. And so I don't see him as someone, who would be depressed, maybe murdered, by like intelligence agencies, right? I have no idea what happened to him, but I really recommend anybody who's interested in it really study Rimbaud and look at Jim's poetry and see the connections that you make there.
I think sometimes people think they don't realize how intelligent he really was, and I think part of that was his fault because of, and it's not his fault, but he was a hardcore alcoholic. I mean, at one point in his life, he literally was in the gutter in L.A. People would walk over him, and there was no Betty Ford Center at the time. There was no sort of culture of being straight edge or whatever, right? You know, so I think that completely, because when he wasn't drunk and when he was sober, I talked to other writers and authors, and people say he was a nice guy, very normal, very down to earth, not argumentative, and extremely witty and quick and interested and curious in other people. And I feel like people kind of just see him as the Lizard King and the leather pants and the falling down on stage and stuff like that. And they miss out on someone, I think, who was just extremely intelligent. I wish he had more chance to show that to people.
Absolutely. And, you know, my book is really about how movements for change in the modern era are defeated. And I just picked Jim as a great example. So I try to stay far away from Jim the person, because that's such a quagmire. If people want to go there and debate all that and study it, that's interesting. You know, I wouldn't put that down for a second. Lewis Carroll, if someone's interested, wants to research if he was a pedophile or not, go for it. It does not change a word that he wrote, okay? Mm-hmm. That's where I kind of draw the line. You know, there's some pretty bad stories about Jim's behavior when he's drunk. Mm-hmm. It's awful. Yeah. And that's a real vulnerability that if you're out in the public eye. I remember once I was doing, I was involved a long time ago in a peaceful political movement, and a reporter from the New York Times wanted to talk to me. And I thought, I know he's going to twist my words. So I tried to really pin them down to where there's no way this could be misconstrued or ripped off. And sure enough, it was. Yeah. So that was just a tiny little thing compared to the Doors. Imagine the twisting of the Doors that went on. Yeah. Yeah, so I think a lot of what I wanted with my book, that's part of why I didn't want to focus on the celebrity, because the instant you focus on the celebrity, you're already defeated. You can't win that way, even though we want to, because like you say, we want to say, wow, this is somebody that a lot of cool people liked, who had cool ideas, and he really had a lot going for him. But the minute one goes down that avenue, it's you've lost. So you see what I'm saying?
I think I do. Yeah. I mean, I guess I wanted to ask a little bit more about his music and his lyrics. Are there any songs that really speak to you that you think are timeless, or that you really that are interesting? Like, what do you like about the Doors? What songs are your favorites?
There's so many, but certainly, Dead President's Corpse in the Driver's Car. The engine runs on glue and tar. I love that because, to me, and I think maybe Jim may have known the same thing, really, and all the people back then, through the grapevine. That was the assassination of President Kennedy was really one of the top 10 moments in American history. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's right up there with the War of 1812. When Andrew Jackson saved the day. But it's sort of the reverse of that. It's like when the bad guys won. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, and Jim, I was just wondering, what did Jim, what are the meanings of that? And the engine runs on glue and tar. It's like the president is part of this horrible machine that's smelly and stinky and toxic. And the whole thing, well, he was trying to wind it down, which probably is one of the reasons why he was killed. Mm-hmm. Here's so many. He was trying to do so many things that were actually pretty cool in a lot of ways, and obviously not everyone was happy with that. But yeah, he was part of that whole machine. The war totally ramped up when he was gone. Right. I mean, Johnson rammed it to the floor, and at the same time had all this stock in Bell helicopter. It just laughed all the way to the bank, because those helicopters were a key component. But yeah, dead president's corpse in the driver's car. The engine runs on glue and tar.
Which song is that from?
I think it's 5-1. I'm
Okay.
I'm not really sure.
I'm going to find it.
I wish I should have listened to everything before this interview. Unfortunately I'm just a busy 9 to 5 or
Yeah, no, I totally get it.
Live, so.
How long did it take you to write this?
Well, the writing of this book stretched over a period of 30 years.
Wow, really?
Yes. Now, obviously, it wasn't being worked on the whole time. There were different phases. So first, phase 1, the original academic thesis edition that we refer to, that was finished by when I was 21. And then a couple years, like a year later, I dug back into it because there's a lot of stuff that I wanted. Well, actually, right after, there was a whole part. I didn't get to write about the American Night in the thesis edition because it came out after my thesis. Mm-hmm. So the American Night is the second posthumously published volume of Jim's poetry, and Frank Lisiandro was the editor of that. And both those books, I believe, at least one of them were New York Times bestsellers at the time.
Yeah.
This was 1990, when the American Night came out. So I wanted to add a chapter about that and cover the great material there, and so I did that right away after I graduated. And then about a year later, Michael McClure had read it and liked the book, so I was really encouraged to make it better. And so I went through it and cleaned up a lot of stuff and released another edition. And then there were like 2 other runs at really cleaning it, like smaller runs. Mm-hmm. Not so big that I needed to change the title of the book. But my editor, Glenn Smith, a.k.a. Jethro Bodine, he was the editor of that, and he had a lot of input into the book. And then 3 years ago, I decided, all right, I really want to clean out, I really want only the best references to be in this book. Frank had advised me that some of the references that I was using in the earlier editions were not really that reliable. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to clean it up and really bring the book to the highest level that I possibly could. And I also hired a good proofreader and editor, real masters in English. He provided a lot of feedback. It actually, going back over it, I was amazed that the professors let me off for some of that stuff. There were lacunae and just plain old gaps in that really, I should have done the work to fill. But when your head's really in it,
yes,
you don't have you know what I mean.
I totally know what you mean. Yeah, I'm writing a book right now, and it's very hard sometimes to take the 5,000 or 50,000 foot view. You know what I mean? Because you're so in the weeds of what you really want to go into one direction. Like, no, that's not going to tell your story. I know you're interested in that, but you need to go here now. Like, I know exactly how you feel. So I need to ask you one more question. Well, I'm going to ask you a couple more, but I want to hear, did you ever see the 1990 movie, The Doors?
Still boycotting it.
Oh, you're boycotting it.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay.
I know you're in it. More power to you. I don't have any problem with anybody who loves the movie, to be clear. And I love Oliver Stone's everything else. Well, at least the film on Kennedy, which actually I haven't seen. I've heard great things.
Yeah.
And I think Oliver Stone does get The Doors. I just think he just really wiped out on this for some reason. Something happened where I don't believe that the movie itself is really what Oliver Stone wanted. So I don't know what happened there. I'd be interested. Frank and others have advised me, and I try to stay focused on the poetry. I think once, I wouldn't be opposed to viewing it, but almost everyone has seen it, so maybe there's value in somebody who hasn't. Right?
Hey, that's fine. That's totally fine. It's a little disappointing. I mean, I think Val Kilmer gives a great performance, but
you said that. Yeah, I remember.
But I think that once you get to know Jim better, you realize like it's very surface what they focused on, just like his good looks and the drugs. And it's like, no, he had so much more he was so, that's the thing I feel like it doesn't come across as much, is that he was so intelligent. He's an extremely intelligent person.
Yeah, there should be a movie about him, an intellectual descendant of Rimbaud.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it is so exciting that, there was the Paris Commune recently when Rimbaud was alive. There was a lot of attempts for humans to gain more freedom from kings and dictators and despots. That, it reminds me of, there's a line in Jim's poetry that says something to the effect of, and every year the Tsar would pick someone and they could be free. There's this sense of that there's a control matrix that's still on us, and now it's kind of obvious. Mm-hmm. But it was really getting going in the 60s. I think it could be a really exciting movie, and it wouldn't have to be just an art movie or an intellectuals movie. There are really exciting movies. Like when I was a kid, one day the whole school just got out of school and we had to go see the movie Gandhi. Mm-hmm. Okay, it would be. I don't mean to put Jim to compare Jim to Gandhi, but what I'm saying is you can make a really exciting movie about ideas and movements without getting lost in who the person really was, all the little details, the scurrilous details and the horrible incidents. You can focus on the important stuff, and it can be interesting, is really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I'm thinking it should be maybe like a graphic novel come to life, like animated. I think it would have to be that.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
I like anime type thing.
Yeah, I think that would be how it. All right, so can you tell everybody where they can find your book?
Absolutely. It's on Amazon, Nook, Google Play, Apple Books, and Kobo, which is the Sony brand. So every major vendor of ebooks has it, and it's also available on hardcover on Amazon.
And that's Burning the May Tree, The Sacrifice of Jim Morrison, Chris Balz.
That's right.
And where can people find you on social media?
So I'm on Goodreads on Amazon. That's the best place to reach me.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for doing the show.
I've really appreciated the opportunity. I'm very impressed with your interviews so far. I hope this adds another good one to your roster. We'll
Absolutely, it does. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Not Fade Away podcast. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you love what you hear, yay, please leave a review. It helps us so much more than you could ever know. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Not Fade Away Podcast. You can email us with comments or suggestions to notfadeawaypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to learn more about my other shows, Book versus Movie, The Fit Bottom Girls, and the Best Neighbors podcast, just follow me at Brooklyn Fit Chick on all social media or check out my main blog, brooklynfitchick.com.